There are two stories inside every human being: the story of who they truly are and the story of who they became in order to survive their parents. Most people never learn to separate the two. They grow up believing their personality is natural, that their reactions are instinct, that their fears are personal, and that their habits are chosen. But the truth is far more haunting and far more liberating once seen clearly. Your childhood never ended. It simply changed shape. The emotional world you were born into did not disappear when you became an adult. It sank into your nervous system, into the rhythms of your thoughts, into the tone of your reactions, into the way you breathe when someone raises their voice. What you call yourself is often a mosaic built from fragments of your parents' unresolved lives. Their impatience became your tension. Their anger became your reflex. Their insecurity became your silence. Their overwhelm became your emotional blueprint. And the most painful part is that this inheritance was not given to you through words. It was transmitted through atmosphere. Children learn their parents not by instruction, but by absorption. You absorb their moods, their frustrations, their anxieties, their unspoken wounds. You inhale their emotional climate like oxygen, and it becomes the invisible architecture of your personality. This is why the past feels alive inside you. You are not remembering your childhood. You are reenacting it. Every time you lose your temper without understanding why, every time you shut down when someone gets close, every time you overgive to avoid conflict, every time you demand love in the way you never received it, every time you feel responsible for fixing everything around you, you are living out a script written before you knew you were alive. Children adapt to survive. Adults mistake the adaptation for identity. And the tragedy is this: the very patterns you resent most in your parents are the patterns you are most likely to repeat. Not because you want to, and not because you are weak, but because the emotional imprint of childhood becomes the gravitational field of your adulthood. Unless you awaken, you will rotate around the same old star, calling it fate. This is the hidden cycle. The impatient child becomes the impatient parent. The wounded child becomes the wounding adult. The child who feared anger becomes the adult who uses anger without knowing why. The child who felt unseen becomes the adult who demands endless attention. And the child who hated being controlled becomes the adult who controls in the same tone and rhythm they once feared. The cycle is not conscious, it is inherited. But there is another side to this tragedy, one even more subtle. Sometimes the adult does not repeat the parent. They flip into the opposite extreme. The child of a cruel parent becomes too kind. The child of a controlling parent becomes overly permissive. The child of a cold parent becomes emotionally indulgent, giving affection not out of love, but out of fear that their own children might feel the same emptiness they felt. This overcorrection is not freedom. It is the same wound wearing a different mask. Because in both extremes, repeating your parents or reversing them, you are still being shaped by them. You are living in reaction to what happened instead of awareness of what is true. Reaction is the shadow of childhood following you into every adult decision you make. This is why your life feels like a pattern. This is why your relationships feel familiar. This is why your failures rhyme with your parents' failures. This is why the same emotional storms repeat generation after generation. You are not cursed. You are unconscious. And unconsciousness is hereditary. Your parents were shaped by their parents. Their parents were shaped by theirs. The emotional DNA moves through the bloodline until someone becomes awake enough to see the pattern for what it is: a ghost in the nervous system, a memory without language, a living echo of a life you never lived. Awakening begins the moment you notice the echo, the moment you stop saying, "This is who I am," and start asking, "Where did this come from?" The moment you see your anger not as personality but as inheritance. The moment you recognize that the fear in your chest is not your fear, but someone else's fear living through you. The moment you understand that your insecurity is the shadow of a voice that died long ago. This clarity is the beginning of breaking the cycle. Awakening does not erase your childhood, but it frees you from repeating it. It reveals the difference between your original self and the self you assembled to survive your upbringing. It shows you that your true identity is not the emotional replica of your parents. It is the awareness watching the replica. You are not the imprint. You are the witness. And the witness is the only part of you that is not inherited. The witness is the quiet, unconditioned part of you that has been present since childhood, watching everything unfold without being shaped by any of it. It watched your parents argue. It watched you shrink. It watched you try to please. It watched you suppress the truth to preserve the relationship. It watched you carry burdens that did not belong to you. And though your mind absorbed the chaos, the witness never did. This witness is your freedom because it is the only part of you that your parents could not reach. They shaped your reactions, yes. They shaped your insecurities, yes. They shaped your emotional reflexes, yes. But they could not shape the awareness behind all of it. This is why healing is possible. You are not trying to fix the part of you that was wounded. You are learning to return to the part of you that was never wounded. But before you can return, something difficult must happen. You must see your parents clearly. Not as monsters, not as saints, not as gods, not as failures, but as human beings, unconscious, inherited, overwhelmed beings who passed down what they did not know how to heal. Most people carry two illusions about their parents. Either my parents were perfect or my parents ruined me. Both illusions block awakening. Your parents were neither gods nor villains. They were wounded children who grew bodies. They were shaped long before they knew they were alive. Their personalities were built on fears they never named, frustrations they never understood, guilt they never resolved, and patterns they never questioned. Their weaknesses were not chosen, they were inherited, the way you inherited yours. When you see this, resentment softens. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve freedom. Resentment binds you to the very patterns you are trying to escape. The more you resent your parents, the more you become them. The more you try not to be like them through anger, the more you imitate their emotional structure. Resentment is the invisible umbilical cord tying you to the past. Awareness is the blade that cuts it. This cutting does not erase your history. It restores your clarity. Because once you stop resenting your parents, you stop reacting to them in your behavior, and you finally begin to see your own life without the distortions of childhood emotion. This is the beginning of adult consciousness. Adult consciousness is not age. It is awakening. It is the moment you realize that your parents' behaviors were not personal to you. You were simply nearby when their unresolved lives overflowed. Their impatience was not about your worth. Their anger was not about your identity. Their neglect was not about your value. Their emotional instability was not about your failures. Most of what you suffered had nothing to do with you. Children cannot understand this. Adults must. When you begin to see this truth, you experience a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the childhood you didn't have. Relief that your pain was never proof of inadequacy. This grief is sacred because it creates space for the child within you to finally be seen, not by your parents, but by you. And in that scene, something shifts. You begin to observe your reactions through a new lens. You notice that your anger resembles the very anger you feared in childhood. You notice that your silence resembles the silence you used to hide inside. You notice that your need for control echoes the controlling atmosphere you grew up with. The recognition is painful, but it is also the first real moment of power you've had in years. Because you cannot heal what you cannot see. Seeing reveals the blueprint inside you. The tone of your parents in the tone of your voice, the rhythm of their anxiety in the rhythm of your thoughts, the weight of their wounds in the weight you carry in your chest. Once you see it, you cannot continue unconsciously. Awareness breaks the spell. This is why awakening feels disruptive. Your entire identity reorganizes itself. The person you thought you were begins to dissolve. The protective layers you built to survive childhood no longer serve you. The emotional armor you wore for safety becomes too heavy to carry. It falls off in pieces, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. But beneath the armor lies your original self, waiting. This original self is not frightened. It is not reactive. It is not shaped by the past. It is not defined by your parents' shadows. It is the self that knew love before love was distorted. It is the self that knew truth before truth was punished. It is the self that knew freedom before fear taught you to shrink. When you meet this self again, you realize something profound. You never truly lost yourself. You only lost access to yourself. Childhood created the distance. Awakening closes it. This closing is not an emotional experience. It is a shift in identity. You stop being the child trying to survive your parents. You become the adult, witnessing the child within, and for the first time you begin to feel safe inside your own life. Feeling safe inside your own life is not something most people ever experience. They feel safe only when circumstances behave, when people approve, when relationships are stable, when everything external aligns perfectly. But this is not safety. It is dependency. Real safety comes from the ability to remain yourself, no matter what the world does, no matter how others behave, no matter how old wounds try to resurrect themselves. This inner safety begins with one realization. You are not the child you once were. You are the consciousness observing the child you once were. And that shift changes everything. When you stop identifying with the wounded child and begin witnessing that child from the clarity of adulthood, you break the generational spell. You stop overreacting to situations that resemble the past. You stop abandoning yourself to avoid conflict. You stop demanding affection from people who cannot give it. You stop repeating emotional patterns that were never yours to begin with. You begin to breathe again, not with your lungs, but with your soul. For the first time, you see your childhood not as destiny, but as information. Not as identity, but as context. Not as a prophecy, but as a map that shows you where the fractures occurred. And every fracture becomes an entry point for awareness. Every wound becomes a doorway. Every scar becomes a teacher. This is the alchemy of awakening. Awakening turns pain into clarity, fear into insight, resentment into understanding. It shows you the exact place where love was interrupted and where it can begin again. Because what you truly long for is not the love you didn't receive from your parents. What you long for is the ability to stop living as if you're still waiting for it. Freedom begins when you stop waiting. But before you can stop waiting, you must confront one of the deepest truths inside you. You have been trying to heal your parents through your behavior. This is one of the great unconscious tragedies of human life. You tried to be good enough to calm your mother's anxiety. You tried to be strong enough to absorb your father's anger. You tried to be perfect enough to prevent conflict. You tried to be invisible enough to avoid being hurt. You tried to be loud enough to be noticed. You tried to be useful enough to be valued. None of it was about you. It was about them. But you carried the cost. And because the child inside you still believes healing your parents will heal you, you keep attracting the same emotional dynamics in adulthood. You choose partners who mirror your parents' wounds. You find yourself in situations that recreate your childhood helplessness. You repeat the same emotional choreography, hoping for a different ending. But the ending will never change until the pattern is seen. When the pattern is seen, something miraculous occurs. The cycle begins to weaken. The energy behind the behavior collapses. The unconscious repetition slows. The emotional gravity loses strength. Awareness breaks momentum. And in that slowing, you start to notice the smallest but most important truth. Your parents did not fail you because you were unlovable. They failed you because they were unconscious. Unconsciousness is the true antagonist of childhood. Not anger, not fear, not punishment, not neglect. Unconsciousness. Unconsciousness blinds parents to the emotional landscape of their children. It makes them reactive instead of receptive, defensive instead of reflective, dominating instead of guiding. They don't see you. They only see their fears, their frustrations, their unresolved past, their internal storms. The child becomes the screen onto which the parent's unconscious life is projected. You were not seen. You were used unintentionally but repeatedly as a container for unresolved pain, and you carried that container into adulthood. But seeing this clearly does not make you bitter. It makes you lucid. Bitterness says, "They ruined me." Lucidity says, "They passed along what they never healed." Bitterness chains you to the past. Lucidity releases you from it. Lucidity is the first breath of liberation. With lucidity comes compassion, not sentimental compassion, but spiritual compassion. The kind that recognizes the suffering behind the behavior. The kind that sees the frightened child inside your parent. The kind that understands their anger was once their shield, their silence was once their survival, their harshness was once their self-protection. This compassion does not excuse. It reveals, and what it reveals is this. You were never fighting your parents, you were fighting their unconsciousness, and unconsciousness cannot be defeated by emotion. It dissolves only in the light of awareness. This is why your healing does not require your parents' participation. It requires your presence. When you awaken, the emotional inheritance stops with you. You stop passing the wound forward. You stop reenacting the script. You stop echoing the past. You stop projecting your childhood into the future. You become the interruption. And every generation depends on at least one interruption, one person who becomes conscious enough to break the cycle that began long before they were born. You are that person now. Becoming the interruption does not mean becoming perfect. It does not mean you never feel fear again, never feel anger again, never repeat a childhood reflex again. Awakening does not erase your humanity. It transforms your relationship to it. The difference now is that you see, you notice the instinct rising. You sense the old pattern activating. You catch the echo before it becomes your voice. And in that moment of noticing, you reclaim your authority. Awareness gives you the power to choose what was once automatic. This is the essence of healing, not the disappearance of wounds, but the disappearance of unconsciousness around them. You stop living from reflex and start living from clarity. You stop reenacting emotion and start responding from presence. You stop confusing inherited patterns with personal truth. And as this clarity deepens, you begin to rewrite the script that shaped you. The first rewrite happens inside your nervous system. The body that once braced for conflict begins to soften. The breath that once tightened in fear begins to expand. The muscles that once carried childhood vigilance begin to release. You start experiencing a feeling that was foreign to your childhood, internal safety. Internal safety is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of awareness. You can feel your triggers without becoming them. You can feel your emotions without drowning in them. You can feel old wounds without identifying with them. This is the moment the child within you finally begins to heal. Not because the past is rewritten, but because the present is reclaimed. The second rewrite happens in your relationships. You stop choosing people who repeat your parents. You stop tolerating behaviors that mirror your childhood pain. You stop trying to rescue those who treat you the way your parents did. You stop giving love the same way you begged for it. Your heart begins to make decisions your childhood never could. And as you grow, your relationships shift in ways you never expected. You begin to set boundaries without fear. You begin to say no without guilt. You begin to speak truth without collapsing. You begin to walk away without abandoning yourself. You begin to receive love without suspicion. You begin to give love without depletion. This is the revolution that happens when the inner child is no longer in charge of the adult's life. The third rewrite happens in your perception of your parents. You begin to see them not through the eyes of the wounded child, but through the eyes of the awakened adult. You see their fragility. You see their confusion. You see the weight they carried. You see the pain they hid. You see the expectations they inherited. You see the emotional inheritance They were too unconscious to refuse, and in this scene, something extraordinary unfolds. You no longer need anything from them. You do not need them to apologize. You do not need them to understand. You do not need them to validate your experience. You do not need them to give the love they were never taught to receive. You release them, not with anger, not with righteousness, but with clarity. Releasing your parents does not mean abandoning them. It means no longer seeking from them what they cannot give. It means ending the inner contract that kept you waiting for the childhood you never had. It means stepping out of the emotional parent-child dynamic and becoming the adult your own life needs. The final rewrite happens in your sense of self. For the first time, you begin to meet yourself without the filter of childhood stories, without the guilt, without the inherited shame, without the false identity that grew out of survival, without the emotional habits that once controlled you, without the fear that once shaped your every reaction. And what you discover is staggering. Beneath the conditioning of childhood, beneath the defenses of adolescence, beneath the strategies of adulthood, there is a self that is whole, not perfect, whole. This self, your original self, was never damaged by your parents' mistakes. It was never defined by their wounds. It was never shaped by their expectations. It was never reduced by their unconsciousness. It was watching, waiting, enduring, and holding the truth until you were ready to return to it. And now, you are returning. You begin to sense a strength within you that is not aggression, a compassion that is not weakness, a clarity that is not coldness, a softness that is not fragility, a dignity that is not pride. This is the self your parents could not raise, because they had not yet met their own self. You are the first in your lineage to meet yours, and meeting this self changes everything about the future. For generations, when you realize that you are the first in your lineage to awaken, something profound settles into your spirit. Not pride, responsibility. Not pressure, purpose. You begin to feel the weight of what it means to break patterns that have been quietly shaping your family for generations. You understand that your healing is not merely personal, it is ancestral. Every moment of awareness you choose alters the emotional trajectory of everyone who comes after you. This responsibility does not feel heavy, it feels sacred. Because you are not just healing your own wounds, you are healing the unconsciousness that once disguised itself as love, as discipline, as protection, as survival. You are dissolving the emotional shadows that your parents never had the tools to face. You are ending a story that began long before your birth. And in ending that story, you begin a new one. This new story begins with a simple but powerful truth. You no longer confuse love with pain. For the first time, you can feel the subtle difference between genuine affection and emotional dependency, between true connection and the reenactment of childhood needs. You stop calling chaos chemistry. You stop calling fear intuition. You stop calling trauma destiny. You stop seeking the parent you never had inside the partners who resemble them. Your heart begins to discern what your childhood could not. You begin to choose relationships that do not require self-abandonment. You begin to recognize kindness that is not manipulation. You begin to trust steadiness over intensity. You begin to feel worthy of a love that does not wound you. This shift is not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and unmistakable. The slow maturation of a soul that has finally stopped reenacting its past. And as this inner shift grows, something else unfolds. Your emotional triggers lose their authority. The situations that once consumed you, the tones of voice that once sent you spiraling, the behaviors that once reopened old wounds, they begin to lose their power. Not because the world becomes gentler, but because you have become clearer. Triggers only control you when they are connected to unexamined wounds. When the wound is seen, the trigger dissolves. This dissolution creates space, space you have never had before. In this space, your true thoughts begin to appear. Not the reactive thoughts of childhood, not the fearful thoughts of adolescence, not the compensating thoughts of adulthood, but the original thoughts of someone who has finally become conscious. These thoughts feel grounded, intuitive, honest, and unfiltered by survival instincts. Inner space is the birthplace of your real mind. With this real mind, you begin to see life differently. You notice how often people confuse stimulation with connection. You notice how many adults still carry the emotional reflexes of frightened children. You notice how people project their parents into every relationship, every disappointment, every argument. And seeing this does not make you superior. It makes you compassionate. Compassion is the natural response to understanding. When you see the wounded child inside others, you stop taking their behavior personally. You stop absorbing their emotions. You stop trying to fix them. You stop interpreting their reactions as commentary on your worth. Their pain becomes their pain, not your responsibility. Their anger becomes their storm, not your identity. Their chaos becomes their journey, not your obligation. You finally step out of the role your childhood forced you into. And when you do, something miraculous happens. Your energy begins to return. The energy you lost managing other people's emotions, the energy you lost anticipating danger, the energy you lost trying to be perfect, the energy you lost trying to avoid punishment, the energy you lost trying to earn affection, that energy comes back quietly, steadily, powerfully. And with that energy comes a clarity so sharp it feels like sight returning after years of darkness. You begin to feel the edges of your own boundaries. You begin to know what no feels like in the body. You begin to sense when your truth is being compromised. You begin to trust your own perception more than the expectations of others. This clarity leads to a final, life-altering realization. The parent you were trying to save is the past version of yourself. All those years you tried to fix your mother's sadness or calm your father's rage. All those years you tried to be enough, strong enough, quiet enough, obedient enough. You were not trying to heal them. You were trying to heal the small, frightened child inside you who believed their love would stop hurting if you just tried harder. But the child inside you cannot be healed by reenacting the past. They can only be healed by finally being seen by you, held by you, protected by you, guided by you. And the moment you become the adult your inner child needed, your entire inner world changes shape. The child stops clinging, the adult stops compensating. The past stops repeating, the future stops intimidating, the present stops overwhelming. You become whole enough to begin leading your own life. Leading your own life is the ultimate rebellion against the past. Not because you reject your parents, but because you stop repeating them. You stop living in the emotional gravity of their fears and expectations. You stop carrying wounds that were never yours to carry. You stop mistaking childhood survival strategies for adult identity. You finally become the author of a story that began long before you learned to speak. This authorship is not loud. It is quiet, subtle, steady. The gentle shift from being shaped by childhood to shaping your destiny with clarity. You feel this shift in small moments. The moment you do not react to a triggering tone of voice. The moment you stand still in the presence of conflict. The moment you choose honesty over people-pleasing. The moment you speak truth without trembling. The moment you set a boundary without guilt. These moments are the building blocks of a new self. A self not built from fear, but from awareness. A self not driven by wounds, but by wisdom. A self not shaped by imitation, but by presence. A self not imprisoned by childhood, but liberated by awakening. And as this self grows, the emotional child within you is finally allowed to rest. They no longer have to defend you. They no longer have to negotiate safety. They no longer have to scan every room for danger. They no longer have to earn love. They no longer have to outperform their wounds. They finally get to be a child, protected, seen, understood, and held. And you, as the awakened adult, become the guardian they never had. This guardianship does not mean shielding the child from discomfort. It means guiding them through discomfort with clarity. It means teaching them that fear is not danger. It means showing them that anger is not authority. It means helping them understand that love is not supposed to hurt. It means reassuring them that they no longer have to adapt to survive. This is how the cycle ends. Not through blame, not through bitterness, not through self-punishment, but through awareness. Awareness sees the wound. Awareness softens the wound. Awareness withdraws energy from the wound. Awareness dissolves the wound. And what emerges after the dissolution is not a new identity, but your original identity, the one that existed before childhood, shaped your nervous system. This identity has always been with you. It was watching you the whole time. It was waiting for you to return. And when you finally return, you discover something astonishing. The pain that once defined you now feels distant, like a story you remember but no longer belong to. The shame that once governed your choices loses its grip. The fear that once shaped your entire emotional landscape becomes nothing more than a faint echo. You realize that the past did not break you. It introduced you to the part of you that cannot be broken. That part is your true self, the quiet witness, the steady consciousness, the intuitive center that survived childhood untouched. That part is the source of your dignity. That part is the source of your strength. That part is the source of your awakening. And now that you are living from that part, something miraculous becomes clear. You did not survive your parents. You outgrew the version of yourself that needed to. You did not transcend your childhood. You reclaimed the self that existed before it. You did not escape the past. You became the presence that dissolves it. This is the end of inherited suffering. This is the end of emotional imitation. This is the end of unconscious repetition. And this is the beginning of a new lineage. A lineage born not from trauma, but from awareness. A lineage where children grow up safe in the presence of a conscious adult. A lineage where love does not wound. A lineage where boundaries protect instead of punish. A lineage where truth is spoken without fear. A lineage where emotional inheritance is replaced by emotional clarity. You are the first chapter of that lineage. Everything you heal within yourself becomes a gift to the future. Everything you refuse to carry becomes freedom for those who follow. Everything you awaken to becomes a light in the darkness of generations. This is how you break the cycle. Not by destroying the past, but by awakening in the present. Not by blaming your parents, but by understanding them. Not by rejecting your childhood, but by transcending it. Your life becomes the evidence that consciousness is stronger than inheritance. And as that consciousness guides you forward, you finally understand. The child you once were was never broken. They were simply waiting for you to wake up and come home. And now at last, you have.